Hi, everyone. Welcome to Tom and Jesse Talk Movies. I am Jesse.
And I'm Tom.
Before we begin, any questions, comments, concerns, please contact us at, I should know this by now, csprograms@cshlibrary.org.
Well, it's somewhat new, so it's okay. We'll go with that.
So today we're going to be talking about a thing. A movie from 1982, John Carpenter, maestro of horror.
Mm-hmm.
Probably most notable in the horror genre for Halloween. Halloween.
Yeah.
So the basic premise of the thing, for those who've never seen it, well, first of all, I guess we should say that this is kind of loosely a remake of a 1951 horror movie. And the concept is kind of really cool.
The Thing from Another World.
Yeah. So an alien life form has crash landed on Earth, where it takes place is Antarctica. Yes?
Yeah, Antarctica.
Okay, good. You're my source of help in this one. So it takes place in Antarctica, and we kind of pick up on a team of researchers led by Kirk Douglas.
Kurt Russell.
Kirk Douglas.
You're doing great.
Wow. All right. Good. So yes, Kurt Russell is the lead scientist, and
Wilford Brimley as well.
Yeah,
before the commercials.
Before diabetes. Yeah, actually, maybe during diabetes.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, so it's a team of researchers that are stationed in Antarctica. The film has a really cool opening shot where a group of two men in a helicopter are chasing down a dog, and they're shooting at this dog. And as kind of the opening credits roll, you're like tracking the path of this dog. And the dog makes its way back to the base where Kurt Russell is stationed. And they end up shooting the dog. And you're like, well, what the heck is this all about? As the events unfold, which we'll get into, there is an alien life form that has kind of infiltrated this dog, has taken over this dog. And then shortly thereafter, that alien life form begins to spread to the rest of the group of scientists, and it begins to kind of shapeshift and mimic human life forms. So the duration of the movie, the plot really is that these group of men no longer trust each other, and they're trying to determine who is infected and who is not infected. It's in the midst of like a 48-hour snowstorm. There's no way for them to successfully extricate themselves from this base, and that's kind of the basic premise of it. So this was not a first-time watch for me, but the last time I saw it was probably 10 to 15 years ago, and I remember liking it, but I just didn't remember enough about it. The thing that really stuck out to me that I did recall, I remember sort of the grotesque dismemberments and the disfigure, the characters becoming disfigured. I remember really strong practical effects, and I was not disappointed. This, again, is a movie that came out in 1982. So that was really one of the most salient aspects of the film that I remember. It was really cool CGI. Before I get into what I liked and I didn't like, I want to ask you your thoughts. What did you think? Now, this was not a first-time watch for you.
No, I've seen it about once, maybe, again, like 10 years ago or so. So somewhat of a fresh watch. We're in October now.
Yes.
Halloween season, so.
Favorite time of the year.
Yes, so let's, I really like this movie. I really like it. John Carpenter is kind of like the master of horror, for the 80s, him, Wes Craven, and so forth. This is kind of the height of horror films, really.
Right.
In the 70s and then really 80s, we saw it just full on. So it being a remake, loosely, of a 1950s kind of sci-fi film, this is completely different. I mean, I've never seen the original film from the 50s, but I imagine this is very different. I really like it. And what I like about the film is that it feels like a mature film. It's, it doesn't play goofy, which a lot of the films at that time are very over the top and corny. And, for a movie about an alien crash in Antarctica and an alien taking over people's bodies, absorbing them, and then mimicking them, and it becomes like a mystery in the sense of, okay, we don't know who is taken over and who is not. So that's a really cool concept. And I think setting plays a really big and important character with this film.
Huge.
It being taking place at a research base in the middle of nowhere, Antarctica, is really fascinating. Because how many other movies we've seen with aliens taking over, they're always in like big cities, and this is really cool because this is a character-driven story. And what really holds my attention is the sense of like distrust that the viewer as well as the characters have with, okay, who is, I guess, infected, whatever word you want to use to describe it, who's human and who's not. And I think that's a really good concept. I think John Carpenter explores that quite well. Our main character, Kurt Russell, I think is great. This is probably my favorite role of his.
Wholeheartedly agree.
He's been in so many things, and I think he's very good. He's very tense in this movie, and he has quite an interesting character. I found him to be pretty relatable because what I like about this movie is that, we have a group of characters and they each have their own personalities, and that's always fun. And, you see like certain people are quick to, panic and buy into the whole, it's an alien, that's what's going on. And then you have other people who are like in denial, like, no, there's got to be some sort of explanation behind it. And then you have Kurt Russell in the middle, and he's pretty grounded. And I really like him. He's very realistic in this kind of film. So I felt like we, the audience, were on board with him, like he represented us. And
it's pretty, don't want to cut you off, but it's pretty early in the film where the de facto leader has kind of gone crazy-ish, or they assume him to have kind of like lost his marbles. He's the guy with the gun. Yeah. So then Kurt Russell sort of assumes that leadership role. And it is interesting to see it from his perspective, because he is someone that's kind of, he's placid. He's not very, excited very easily. And you're almost guided in a way by a lot of his actions and his motivations, which I think, because he's such an interesting character, it really works for the film. So please keep going.
No, absolutely. And obviously the standout, and you'll hear a lot of people who are certainly big horror fans will talk about the standout for the movie is the special effects, not using any sort of computer generated imagery. This is all practical. And I think it looks great even in 2021. We're watching this and I'm like, this holds up really nicely. And this is something we should be doing more nowadays. And, I know nothing kills a horror film for me more than really bad CGI computer effects where it just looks so fake. And the whole thing about horror is that you want to be able to believe what's going on, because usually in horror, what happens is stuff that's so unbelievable. So having it be makeup based is brilliant.
Totally.
And the way that the creatures, the thing looks is really great. And it's pretty gruesome as well. But what I really like about this movie are the characters and how it was just, like a checklist of so many things. Like, all right, setting. I'm big into setting. I think a setting is important when you watch a film, because you want to be able to be sucked into the story that's, what's going on. So Antarctica is really, really cool. I feel like, at the time in the 80s, this was something that was fresh. And I still feel like, this is still pretty fresh today. It holds up. Sure. But my only real issue with the film was that I felt in the middle of it was a little slow. I think we have a very strong opening. Right away, we open up seeing a Norwegian helicopter fly into the research.
I love that opening scene.
Yeah, it's a great helicopter with, I think it's 2 people or whatever, fly into the airspace of the research facility, and all the, there's maybe like 10 or 11 researchers there, and they're like, what's going on? And it kind of just picks up from there. And I like a movie where it just starts right away.
There's a language barrier between both parties.
Yeah.
The Americans don't obviously speak the language. They just see that there's a gun pointed at their dog. They don't know if these interlopers are hostile, if then they're going to turn the gun on them. So that the drama itself in just that little scene in the first 5 minutes, I mean, it's tense, and it so much throughout that movie, it maintains that level of intensity. There's so many moments where you're just on the edge of your seat.
Exactly. I think as the film progresses, we get to learn more about each character. And I really like how opposite our 2 leads are, Kurt Russell and Wilford Brimley. And Wilford is, I guess the doctor, and he kind of he's figuring out what's going on. He's like, whatever organism killed one of our guys has the ability to like absorb them and kind of take over their body to the point where it's like you don't know who to trust.
Right.
And that's pretty cool. That's really important. And it being already an isolated environment, you feel kind of like closed in, almost like a haunted house kind of scenario, because they're running around this research facility. And it's just a really interesting concept. And that's what I like about John Carpenter. And this has a lot of other, it has a lot of different kind of like it doesn't play corny at all.
Not at all.
Because this is something it plays pretty serious. And I think we've seen, especially in the 80s, a lot of other really silly things. And
even some of, now I haven't seen the entirety of John Carpenter's filmography, but even his later stuff, there's an element of like surrealism where it's like, there's a little bit of like in The Mouth of Madness, right? There's kind of an element of goofiness to some of that stuff. This just takes the right tone, I feel like a horror movie should.
Exactly. And it's a very atmospheric kind of film. And I think if you can get past the gruesome, blood and gore.
And there are some really.
There are. I feel that I can see a lot of people enjoying it. What I like about Carpenter is that a lot of his movies that came out at this time, I mean, we had The Fog come out 2 years earlier. That was with Jamie Lee Curtis, and then Halloween. They all kind of look the same. They all have a stamp on it, and I really like that. All of his early work, like the stuff looks the same, which is great, because it's such a good look. He has a lot of slow camera movements, and the camera is also kind of just stagnant for a lot of shots, which I like, and it works for that.
Oh yeah. So, I don't want to say this hyperbolically. I know that we discussed this before. I don't want to say it's like top 5 favorite horror movies for me, but I would say pretty securely it's in the top 10 for horror movies I've seen, for all the reasons that you kind of you delineate.
It just feels like a refreshing kind of movie because it's nice. Like while we have films like in the 80s, especially like the Freddy Krueger movies and the Friday the 13th, and as much as we love those are entertaining. Right. They're just they're just body count movies, and there's no real depth to. I mean, maybe there's more depth to like Nightmare on Elm Street, but then like this is the height of like serial like killers and mass people. It's
so divergent from that. And this is going to sound funny, but there's a degree of plausibility in it. Yeah. We don't get like a lot of explanation as to why an alien is there. And guess what? I don't need it. They show you a scene of a spaceship that crash landed. And I think because of just everything else that's done so stellar in the movie, from the relations between the characters and the fact that they themselves are kind of a little bit incredulous. And then as you start seeing these brutal, transformations, you're just like, well, wait, okay, I buy the fact that they're aliens on this planet.
Yeah.
One of the points that I want to pick up on that really I want to hammer home is one of the reasons why this movie for me was so effective is because of that setting. And you talk about the sort of, silliness of the 1980s with some of the slasher movies, even take like a Friday the 13th, which is certainly a little bit more serious until then Nightmare on Elm Street. It's still kind of silly and gory. There's an element of horror to this that's just, it's really brutal. And I love that. And I love the setting. I would almost liken it, if I could, to maybe like an Alien in terms of.
I would compare very much to
that because it's that closed corridor horror. It's the inescapability of the setting, which you like to talk about settings being an important character. Well, you're like, okay, they're trapped in a 48-hour snowstorm. There's really nowhere that they can fly off to. They don't even want to leave their site necessarily because they don't want this virus to spread further and corrupt the human population.
Right.
Pretty early on in the movie, one of the things that engenders Wilford Brimley's insanity is that he runs a diagnostic on the computer, and the computer is basically telling him that, half the world's population would be infected if this thing is not contained. And I'm just like, wow, this is so cool. So
it's smart. It's a smart
movie. I just love, even more than the grotesque disfigurations of like, the the way that like body parts start coming off, you know, I'm not going to get too much into that because there's some very, very unique fatalities, we'll say. You're someone that's seen like more horror movies than just about anyone I know. Would you say that some of the scenes were really creative in
They are.
the way that people start changing shape? And so I thought that
it's almost like believable. Like you can kind of see it happening.
Right. And that's a testament to the practical effects. And I'm like, so many times, I'm not going to dwell on this. I don't want to talk about Thing 2011. It's an awful film in every regard.
Yeah, there was a remake in 2011.
Yes, which they considered a prequel, I think, leading up to the events of. The only thing
it's the same thing.
And the only thing I want to say about that movie is one of the reasons why it was panned the way it was, because instead of practical effects, they went to CGI. They went to computer-generated imagery. And it looked awful. And this was a movie that came out in 2011, and you go back, and I watched some clips from it, and I'm like, wow, like this does not hold up at all. So of course, leading to that credibility of the movie still looking so good and being so believable is the fact that 40 years ago, you're using, you know, you're using prosthetics and that sort of thing. That ages well.
Yes.
Something else that I really loved, I just love the psychology of the film. I just love the there's a certain tenseness.
There's a lot of psychological tension in the film,
and it's brought on by the fact that you don't know who's infected. Mm-hmm. You know, some of the characters start playing games with other characters to try and make it look as though someone else is infected.
One scene that I really think stands out in the film is there's a point in the movie where we have a group of researchers. They're in one room, and Kurt Russell's kind of taking the lead and saying, this is how we're going to figure out who they say they are and who is not. Mm-hmm. And they do they get blood from everybody, and they test the blood. And it's one person that, like, watching it this time, I was like, oh yeah, I forgot it was that person. And they're all tied up. And it's a very tense moment because it all comes down to they're starting to turn on each other. And I think the isolation and the cold is getting to them. And you know, if that stuff isn't scary enough, they throw in this alien thing. And that's a really brilliant scene. To me, that's probably the best scene in the film because of the special effects and the tension. And you're like, wow. And, you know, it's a very mature film, but it feels like a really well-made and mature kind of movie put together. Totally. And that's why I say it's really refreshing. I walked away so pleased with this movie in so many ways. And that was one scene that I loved in particular, where there was tension throughout the movie, and then there's some event that just amplifies it even more. Mm-hmm. So the reason, getting back to the scene that you just discussed, Kurt Russell's collecting blood samples, putting them in a petri dish, and then, you know, he theorizes that if you put an element of fire into the petri dish, then that alien life form is going to react in some way. Yes.
But the reason he had to go about inventing that method is because midway through the movie, the guy that's responsible, the scientist that's responsible for coming up with an actual blood test, is killed. So, like, you see the scientist that's responsible for such a major development in the movie die off early on, and you're like, well, what the heck is going to happen now? There was another scene where, you know, all the men had coats or uniforms with their name. Yeah. So Kurt Russell's character, McCready, somebody finds a kind of a mutilated shirt of McCready's. Mm-hmm. And now what the men speculate is before men start to transform into monsters, there's some visible tell. There's a sign that they're going to start to transform. And that sign manifests itself in the jacket being torn in the back, or, like, you know, the body starts to physically morph, and thus it starts ripping clothing apart. Mm-hmm. So one of the men outside finds McCready's uniform, kind of with tears in the back of it. And then McCready is supposed to be the leader of this group, right? And now none of the men can trust their own leader.
Right.
I mean, it was just,
you didn't, as a viewer, it's like you feel unsafe. Like, I don't know who to trust and who not. That's really cool. It's like when you're reading a good suspense.
Oh, absolutely. And there was just so many moments. And it was, I happen to really like the pacing. I know you had said that you think that
it's a little slow.
It's a little slow. I liked it from the stance that there's a camaraderie between the men. Mm-hmm. And I like getting a little bit more invested in who these characters are. And it does seem like that men that have a good rapport with one another. And I think that the reason why that's important is because when they do start to distrust each other, it's not as though this is coming out of nowhere. These men liked each other. These men had a bond with each other, and now they're so quick to turn on one. I thought that was well done.
It's very well done. That's what makes a horror movie good and you don't see it as much today, where we actually have good characters.
Yeah, I want characters that I care about.
Yeah, and that's so lacking in a lot of horror films.
And as much as I think the slasher genre for the most part gets a pretty bad rep, but maybe rightly so, in that these characters are so dispensable. It's like they're characters in slasher movies in particular are there to serve one purpose, and that's like to get their body parts chopped off. It's like there's nothing very insightful, there's nothing very in-depth about most characters, I would say, in horror movies. They're there just to be brutalized in so many ways. But this movie was so antithetical to that sort of way of thinking, because they really do kind of get invested in these characters. To me, the movie's an hour and 49 minutes, an hour 15 minutes.
Yeah, a little less.
It breezed by.
It does overall, yeah. I just, like, the halfway through, I'm like, I feel like we could cut like 15 minutes.
Okay, so you would say that some of the like the part where they are in the rec room interacting with one another.
Before, I would say a little before that.
Okay.
Yeah, but otherwise, this is very good stuff.
I want to. We've been pretty careful about not revealing too much thus far. Do you want to kind of talk about the ending without giving it away, or are you satisfied with the ending?
I'm fine with it. I would have liked a little bit more resolution, maybe with a certain character or two, but it doesn't ruin the movie for me. I'm kind of okay with it. Yeah.
I know we're trying to tiptoe around this. I'll say that I went back and I did a little research, and I found out that there was you have to forgive me, I can't remember if there was another ending that was shot or if it was devised. And that ending, the one that's not in the film, was very concrete. It was clear cut. This is what happens in the end. One of the things that I think is so effective about this strategy with the theatrical ending is that it's ambiguous. There isn't a ton of resolution. And I think that keeps with the theme of you can't trust your neighbor. I don't know if that person's infected. Without revealing anything in the end, there's a lot of ambiguity. In the remaining survivors, there's question marks, we'll say.
Yeah, man, I would have liked, I mean, like I said, I'm fine with it, but I would have liked, I always like a resolution at the end of a movie. I feel like, to me, a movie is an emotional investment, and for it to end open-ended, which not so much here, but in general, it's kind of like, why do you do that?
Right. Also, it's funny for me when I watch movies now, I'm just expecting that, regardless of genre, that movie is going to end itself or resolve itself in a way where it just sets itself up for the next film in the franchise. And I like that this was John Carpenter made a film that was like really contained, where it's like, I felt good about where the movie ends. I don't feel as though it was necessary to make a sequel. Clearly, John Carpenter didn't, because there never was one.
Right.
But I like the fact that this is something that you can rewatch, and you can also kind of pick up on some details that you probably didn't see in your initial watching. I would have liked to have seen a sequel, but only if John Carpenter returned. And I'm not going to get into some other characters that should have returned, but would you have liked to see a sequel with maybe the original team, or you think that it was just?
No, I think it's fine the way it is.
Don't touch the money.
Don't touch it. Don't touch it. It's a complete entity. Leave it alone.
I think that was one of the other things I read, that like they filmed obviously in a very, very cold climate, and like John Carpenter was like, I would never do that again.
Yes.
So I get it.
But I understand.
Loved it. Absolutely loved it. Like I said, definitely a top 10 horror movie.
Very mature film, standout.
And for any of you who are really invested in physical media, the thing recently just came out on 4K, which you just watched.
I did. Very nice.
Very nice.
Very nice.
I
And
love
it's a
keeping
collection.
discs alive.
I love physical media.
We got to keep those alive if we can. Tom and I obsessively talk about
Yes, we do.
that.
Yes.
Yeah. So go
Awesome.
rent it at your library or buy it on Toolkit.
And next up for Halloween month, we're going to be talking about David Cronenberg's Videodrome. Both films. You've never seen it.
Never seen it.
I saw it in high school and don't remember a thing. Cool. So it will be a fresh watch. That film stars James Woods, and very, very much looking forward to it. Another surreal, bizarre film.
Cool. Same here.
We'll see you next time.
Thank you guys for watching.
Thank you.